Okay. If you have remembered that in the previous class, we have discussed that what is about the object-oriented programming, how Python supports the object-oriented programming. We discussed about how to define a class and how to define the member functions and the data member. There we have discussed that each of the member function must take self as an argument. Self as an argument. However, while calling the member function through the object, we may not specify anything for self. Self automatically actually refers to the uh, currently invoking object. Whichever object is invoking that method, self automatically refers to that particular object. We have discussed that any variable, the data member that you are writing with self dot something, then that uh, those are actually the data members, right? There is a special kind of member function is init underscore underscore init underscore underscore. So this is a special type of member function which acts as a constructor. That means whenever the object is created, whenever an object is created, the init function is automatically gets called, and whatever the instructions we have written, whatever the statements we have written inside that init are executed. That means for every object, the init is being called every time you are creating an object. We have given this example of a class student. Here we have created three objects, S1, S2, S3, and for S1 init will be called, for S2 init will be called, for S3 init will be called. As S1 will call the init, and init takes three arguments excluding self, because we don't need to pass anything for self. So therefore, three parameters have been passed to the while calling it, while calling the init function. So what is the syntax for creating an object? Object name equals to the class name in the bracket the required number of parameters that you need to pass to the init. If you do not need to pass anything, just create the object with self argument. Only the self argument must be there. So we have discussed up to this one, right? Now, suppose one of the object or few of the objects that you are using are not required. Like in our previous example, S1, S2, S3 you are using, and that is no longer required. If the object is no longer required, you do not need to free it explicitly. You do not write to any command to free it. When you are done with an object, you don't have to delete or free it explicitly. You don't need. You don't have to delete. You have to delete it or free it. Python has automatic garbage collection. So Python will do it for you, automatically garbage collection. How it will know that it is no longer required? Once it is found that no one is referring to that, none of the object is referring to that, or no, the program is not referring to that, automatically it will delete it from the memory. So Python will automatically detect when all of the references to a piece of memory have gone out of scope. If a particular object has not been referenced by any of the locations, then automatically it will be read by the Python. So Python will automatically detect when all of the references to a piece of memory have gone out of scope and automatically freeze that memory. Is it understood? That means the freeing of memory, for freeing of memory, user don't have to write the code, do not have to explicitly write the command for the same. So generally works well for few memory leaks. So memory leak usually doesn't occur. Memory leak, you know or not? How many of you know that what is memory leak? Anybody having knowledge about memory leak?
Sir, when a object is not pointed by any of the reference value, then the memory is lost inside the code.
Actually, in programming in C or C++ or Java, in C or C++, the memory leak refers to if the memory is allocated dynamically and not deleted explicitly by the user. If the memory is allocated dynamically and not reallocated explicitly by the user, that lead to memory leak, or those are called the orphan memory blocks or memory bleeding. Memory bleeding, orphan memory blocks, memory leaks, these are same. So for that we need to collect we have a garbage collector over there. Now here you do not need any garbage collector, right? So it will prevent some of the memory leaks. There is also no destructor method for the classes. Like we have in C++, we will have a destructor which gets called whenever an object goes out of the scope. That is not over here, but similar, we have similar kind of function which can act in that way, but destructor is not there. There is no destructor method in the class as it is there in the C++. We get tilde symbol having the same name as the class. Any doubt from this?
Sir, once again, memory leak.
Memory leak. Okay. Memory leak says, suppose I'll give an example of C++ first. In C++, how memory leak actually occurs. Suppose you have allocated some memory dynamically. Dynamically means by using the new operator. Integer star p is equal to new int of 10. Some memory blocks are allocated. As the blocks you have allocated dynamically, and if you will not use free statement or delete statement, if you will not use the delete statement, those memory location will not be freed. Your program will end, but those memory locations are not being freed. As those memory locations are not free, therefore those are called the memory leak or memory bleeding or orphan memory blocks, right? So but here it is not like that in Python. Once suppose you have some objects you have created, your program end. Once the program will end, it will find that none of the memory locations are pointing to that object, so it will automatically deallocate it. So user do not need to write the code for seeing that which are being referred or how to collect the garbage. It's not like that. The memory leak is being automatically being managed by the Python. So this memory leak is managed by the Python itself, right? So if memory allocated but not deallocated explicitly by the user doesn't have to worry. Python will take care of it. Is it understood?
Yes, sir.
So how to access the attributes and methods? So I said that inside the class you will have some methods and you will have some attributes. So attributes are in C++ we say as called the data members, and the methods in a class in C++ we say it's a member functions. Here we say the attributes and methods. This is an example that class student which takes we have a init function which takes 2 arguments. We assign the value over there. We have a get age function which doesn't take any argument. Self is only the default argument, right? Self is only the default argument. So here self and here self, these two are default argument. So get age is not taking an argument and returning self age. Do remember I have taken a class with a constructor init and get age as a method, right? So can you identify what are the data members over here? What are the attributes over here?
Sir, full underscore name and age.
Full numbers underscore name and age. Why not N and A? Full name and age, you can see it is written with self, correct? And this N and A are nothing but these are being passed as parameters. So these are local parameters only. Whereas if you are writing self dot something, that means it is for the these are the data members, right? So once the class is created, suppose this is the class created, I want to create an object of this class student. So I'll write f is equal to student, and as the init function takes two arguments n and a, so we are passing for name we pass Bob Smith and age we pass 20, right? And if I see over here, this is interesting. If I write f dot full name, it will print the name. F dot, what is f? F is the object. F is the object. This is the object. Correct? This is the object. F is the object, student is the class name. Correct? So if I write f dot full name, what is full name? Full name is a attribute. So that attribute we can access it. F dot get age, just look over here. Get age is a method, so we can access it f dot get age. So from this, what we can see over here, we can access the attributes and methods through the object. We can access the attributes and methods through the object. But usually in C++ or in Java, the default method, default scope is private. Default scope is private. Attributes are generally being kept in the private section. You may kept in the public, but it is generally used in the private section. But here default is public. So you can access those attributes and methods simply by using object.attribute name or object.method name. I hope it is understood. Now,
Sir,
yes.
sir, if the default scope is public,
Yes.
then anyone can modify it from outside.
You can, if you want to make it private, private is also there. You can change it to private. That I'll tell you that how to declare the private just by putting the underscore symbol. I will tell you that how to make the private members or methods as private. But default is public.
Okay.
Okay, because Python gives more flexibility actually, more flexibility of accessing. But if you want to access it with a private, you want to give the private mode, that is also there. So occasionally, the names of an attribute or a method of a class is only given at runtime. Sometimes the attribute or method name is given at the runtime. For example, get attribute object instance string. I'll give you that. What is this object instance and string? It will be better understood if I go for an example. Just look over here. F is equal to student Bob Smith 23. This is what I am creating an object. I am creating an object by calling this is the class name by passing two parameters, Bob Smith and 23. This is as the name, this is as the age, right? If I use the get attribute function, get attribute f comma full name. What is full name? Full name is a attribute of student class. So for the object f, if I give full name, this will return Bob Smith. Correct? If I give full name, what is full name? Full name is the attribute name. But similarly, if I give get age, but get age is what? Get age is a method, right? So it will return like this. Get method get age of a class student at this location. It will give that in which location it is there. Try to understand. If I give the attribute name, it returns the value of that attribute. If I give the method name, if I give only the method name, it returns what? It returns the memory location. But if I write in this way, so it will call the getAge function and returns 23. Is it understood? But if I give something different which is not present, suppose I give get birthday which is not present, then that will give an error. Is it understood? Any doubt from this slide?
Sir,
We
if we can access directly by object reference, then why to go for this get attribute function?
It says that sometimes, very few times during your program, while you are writing a program, inside the program you want to get it through the object, particular object's full name you want to access, or particular object's method address you want to access. Very few times you might be accessing. In general, we do not access. We have written over here occasionally. Occasionally, sometimes it is required. So if it is required in your program, you may access it also. That is also there. This is another file. Flexibility is given. So not necessary that you will use it. This is a flexibility given that during execution also you can get that. Is it understood?
Yes.
So here I have written returns. If I give this returns the reference to the attribute or method. I have written over here. This returns the address reference. So what I talked about get attribute. Similarly, you have a has attribute is a method. So suppose I will create an object. F is the object of this student class. Now I'll check whether full name is an attribute or not. So has attribute checks whether this attribute name, this string, is an attribute in the object F or not. So here it returns true. Similarly, if I'll check whether getAge is a method of F or not. So it says true. Even if it has attribute, it says that whether it is a member of this or not. But if I say get birthday, this returns false. This returns false. I hope it is understood. Let us go for another example. I have a class bank account. I have class bank account which have 3 member functions. INIT, deposit and withdraw. These are the 3 member functions. INIT is, as you know, INIT is the it's a constructor function, right? All are having the self as one of the parameter. The deposit takes a particular amount to deposit, withdraw takes a particular amount to withdraw. Correct? So in the bank account, whenever somebody will open an account, suppose SC123 is account, is object of the bank account. Correct? SC123 is an object. This is an object of this class. Correct? Now when account 123 will be created, so for once it is created, this balance will become 0. Its own balance is actually a attribute of this object SC123. If I create another object, balance is another attribute in that particular object. So you may create a number of objects. For every object, an attribute will be created. So for if I am calling suppose SC123, 1000. Sorry, SC123 in the bracket deposit dot deposit 1000. So what will happen? So self dot balance is equal to self dot balance plus amount. Why I am writing self dot balance over here? Because this is the data member or in for the object. And what is this amount? This amount is nothing but the parameter that you have passed. This is the parameter that you have passed. But what is this self dot balance? As you are using self dot, that means for the current object, and you may return the self dot balance after updating. Similarly, for withdraw, if I want to a particular amount to withdraw, so I'll check that whether it is whether amount is greater than the self dot balance, because while I withdraw, I'll check that whether that is more than the balance available or not. Otherwise, it will return the insufficient fund. If it is balance is there, then self dot balance is equal to self dot balance minus amount. And if you want, you may return also self dot balance. Correct? So this INIT function, it creates an instance of a class and defines instances, that is objects variable. So it's like a constructor. And what is this self over here? We have discussed each member function of the class takes a self as the first parameter. Here you can see that I have written that AC123, the object dot balance is equal to value. So object dot balance is a data member, so I can directly access it as it is public in nature. So we can access the data member directly. I hope it is understood. Any doubt over here from this slide? Is it understood?
One doubt, sir. Is it compulsory to define init function in every program?
No, not necessary. Not necessary. But as I said, what is about the constructor in C++? If you don't have a constructor, what it does? Constructor.
Default constructor, it will call the default constructor.
Okay. Similarly, here also a default is there. I will go for the next slide and I will tell you that where the default constructor can be used. So the INIT creates instance of a class and defines instances, also known as the object variable, and it is a constructor, right? It defines instances. Each member function of the class, class first parameter as self. So what is the first parameter? Self. So for every method, you have to have first parameter as self. For each of the methods, the first parameter must be self. Self is a reference to the current instance. It is a reference to the current instance. It lets you access all the instance variable of the specific instance you are working with. So what we can access? It lets you to access all the instance variables of the specific instance. You can see self dot balance, self dot, you can see over here self dot balance I have written. So through self dot I can access all the variables that is defined inside the class. So how many member functions I have defined in the previous program? We have INIT, deposit, and withdraw. And out of which, hello.
Sir, not audible, sir, properly.
Hello. Now, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So inside that class, we have 3 member functions: INIT, deposit, and withdraw. Out of which INIT will be invoked whenever an object is created. All the instance variables should be defined in the INIT. So if you have some data members or that you are using, that should be defined inside. This line you must remember. All the instance variables should be defined inside the INIT. Otherwise, that will give you error. If you want to work with some of the variables, that has to be declared inside the INIT. For the class, that means data members, what you want to use, the data members must be defined inside the INIT. Actually, there is a method called new. The new is the constructor that invokes INIT. This is inbuilt actually. This is inbuilt. Whenever you are creating your object, the new constructor is called, that it will invoke the init. The primary duty of the constructor is to set the state of the object's attribute. The primary duty of the constructor is to set the state of the object's attribute. State of the object's attribute means roll number. What is the value of roll number? What is the value of name? What is the value of mark? What is the value of grade? These things. And the constructors may have default parameters. Like any of the method can have default parameters. The constructor can also have default. We can have default parameter for the constructors as well. This was also there in C++. We can, like any other method, we can give default parameters. Similarly, for the init also, we can give default parameters. Constructors may have default parameters. Calling an object's constructor, is a signal to the interpreter to create a new object of the data type of the class. So calling an object constructor means through the class name, if you are calling an object constructor, what does it mean? It is a signal to the interpreter to create a new object of that data type of the class. Correct? So the moment you write account 123 is equal to bank account. So calling the object constructor, that means you are creating this by writing this. Here you don't write, no need to pass the self, never pass self as it's automatic. You don't need to pass anything over here, just the class name and the method for which it will create a object. So how to access the members of the object? I have already told that object dot balance. This is required outside the class definition. This is inside the class definition, self dot balance. Outside the class, object dot balance. Inside the class, self dot balance. I hope it is understood. Outside the class, if you want to access, you will write object dot attribute name. Inside the class, if you want to access, you will write self dot attribute name. And to invoke the method, the object dot method name. So here also don't need to pass the self. Is everything understood from this slide?
Yes, sir.
As you were asking about whether if you do not have init, whether it will execute or not. See over here, we have class A. We have a method, display method. Display method also doesn't take any argument. So I can create an object small a equals to A. So it will, once you create an object, it will start invoking the constructor, and no constructor you have defined. If no constructor is defined in the class, Python creates a default constructor of its own. Correct? If no constructor is defined in the class, Python creates a default constructor of its own. Is it understood, this one?
Yes, sir. Sir, we can we define the variables also inside this function? Constructor.
Inside the function, you can define variables, you can declare variables, but those will not become the data members. Those, anything that you write inside the init, that becomes the data member. Suppose inside the display I use some variables x, y, z something. Those are only available for the display. Is it clear?
Yes, sir. So, sir, if we use any variable inside a function, then we must have to declare the init function.
No.
init function.
Now, if you want for a object, if you want some variables for the object, then you define inside the init. If it is only use some temporary variable you require inside a function, inside a method, that you can define inside the method itself. But something like roll number, name, and mark, so that might be used throughout your program, many methods. So that is actually a variable for the class, for every object that is required. So any variable which is required for every object, that must be declared as inside the init.
Yes, sir. Got it.
Okay. The attributes. There are two kinds of attributes. There are two kinds of attributes. The non-method data stored by objects are called attributes. Non-method data, that means if it is not a method, it must be data actually. So those are attributes for an object. There are two kinds of attribute. One is data attributes and class attributes. Till now, what you have used are data attributes. That means for every object, a separate variable, separate data members will be created. Suppose I create self.roll number, self.name, self.mark. That means this is different for different objects. For every object, there is a separate attribute. So variable owned by a particular instance of a class, this data attributes, each instance has its own value for it. These are the most common kind of attributes. Generally, we use these kind of attributes. These are called which attributes? Data attributes. That means these example that I have given, for example, this one, the self.balance is a data attribute. So you may create a number of objects. For every object, the balance will be different. Those are data attributes. So each instance has its own value for it. Each instance has its own value for it. But there is another kind of attribute. Those are called the class attributes. Those are called the class attributes. What are class attributes? These are owned by the class as a whole. This is not for an object. This is for a class. So all class instances share the same value for it. Got it? Class attributes are owned by class as a whole. All class instances share the same value for it. These are called static variables in some of the languages. Like in C++, we have static data member, static member functions you must have read. Have you read static data member functions or not?
Yes, sir.
What is a static data member?
So data member which is available for all the objects of the class. We have to define it once and use for every object.
How do you define a member as static, data member as static?
Using static key.
Using static keyword over there. In
And
C++, in C++, when you use the static, there are 2-3 properties over there. One, you will use a static keyword so that this becomes a static data member and available or shared by all the objects of the same class. And the static attribute must be defined immediately after the class declaration. The class name, scope resolution, variable name, that you have to write. You must have, hope you must have remembered. That's the nature of that static variable is same as class attributes over here. That means we want some variables to be shared by all the objects of the same class. Can anybody say, is there any difference between global variable and static variable? Is there any difference between static data? We have a static data member and a global variable. Is there any difference? In C++, at least you say?
Sir, global variable can be accessed through the program, but static data member can be accessed through the class.
Class means inside the class only we can access.
Yes, sir.
If you declare a variable as static or data member as static, this becomes global. This becomes global for all the objects of the same class. For all the objects of the same class, it will behave like a global. Whereas if it is a global variable, then it can be accessed by any of the classes, any of the data members. Whereas static becomes a global for that class only. For that class only. So any object you create for that class can have access to that variable. Hope it is understood. So here the class attribute means we are going to define some attributes which need to be shared by all the objects of the same class. So this is good for class-wide constants and building counter of how many instances of the class have been made. Correct? So what is its use? This is good for class-wide constants. So for class-wide means for every object you may create a number of objects. For every object it is same. It is shared. Second, building counter for how many instances of the class have been made. If I want to know that how many objects are being created, I can take a variable as a static variable or as a class variable, and I'll go on incrementing that, because for every object it will increment because it is being shared by all the objects. Is that clear? Is it understood? Class attribute is understood, or any doubt over here?
Understood, sir.
Okay. So I told there are two different types of attribute: data attribute and class attribute. Let us go for an example of data attribute. Data attributes are created and initialized by INIT method. I have already told, if I using some data attributes that has to be in INIT method. So all data members has to be defined inside the INIT. So simply assigning to a name creates the attribute. Use put some name over there, that becomes an attribute. Inside the class refers to data attributes using self. So inside the class, if you want to access that attribute, write self dot attribute name. Write self dot attribute name. The self dot attribute name. Correct? So two things you have to remember. If you want some attribute to be kept for the class, you define it inside the INIT, and inside the class, if you want to access, write self dot. For example, class teacher, and inside the INIT we have taken full name. So we have written self dot full name, and here also self dot full name. But however, there is another kind of attribute I said is called the class attribute. The class attributes. This is shared by all the objects of the same class. So because all instances of a class share one copy of a class attribute, when any instance changes it, the value is changed for all instances. So this is important, remember. Any instance changes it, the value is changed for all instances. Correct? Class attributes are defined within a class definition and outside of any method. Two things. One, it must be defined within a class definition, but outside of any method. That means to access it, I may not use an object name. I can directly call it using the class name. Although you may use object, but there is no meaning. You can use it by using the class name instead of the object. Since there is one of these attributes for class and not for instance, they are accessed via a different notation. So what it says, there is no, see, since there is one of these attributes per class, there is one of these attributes per class. So for every class, if we are having a class attribute, this is across for the objects and not one per instance. It is not one per instance, it's one for a class. Correct? So how will you access it? You will access in this way: self dot underscore underscore class underscore underscore dot name. Correct? To access the class attribute, you will use self dot underscore underscore class underscore underscore dot name. So this notation is used. This is just one way to do this, and the safest in general. In general, what you can use, we can also access it through an object, but we can directly access it through the class itself. Just look over here. Example. Suppose I have a class sample. If you define something which is not inside the INIT, is it inside the INIT? X is equal to 25 is not inside INIT. So this is a class attribute. It is not inside INIT, right? This is a class attribute. And how to access it? I will write self dot underscore underscore class underscore underscore dot x plus 1 equals to 0. Is it understood? So we can access it by using self dot class dot the variable name or the class attribute name. We can use through the object, but again we have to write. Suppose we have a is equal to sample. So a is an object. Through the object, I can call the function. To access x, I will write a dot class dot x. A dot class dot x. I hope it is understood. We can see over here inside the INIT I have declared my total. So that means data attribute. This is a class attribute. So I can call this class attribute overall total. Anywhere I can directly write C counter dot overall total. What is counter? Counter is the class name dot overall total. I can directly write in this way also. But while writing my total, I am writing self dot my total. So outside of the class, if I want to access, I will write this syntax that I have used. Any doubt? Any doubt from this one?
No, sir.
Okay, let me take the attendance first. 4, 7, 8, 9, 10. 14. Sangeeta, you write your roll number. You have written your registration number perhaps. 23. Fourteen is Sangeeta, okay. 14 is at present. 23. 23 absent. 4, 23 and 31. 4, 23 and 31. Okay. Is there any doubt? Next class we will go for passing parameters to the objects and all. Yes, PPT I will send in the group, but I have already told I will send it when the classes will be this unit will almost going to cover, because otherwise you will not attend the class seriously. I want that you must attend the class first, take from here and try to do it. Otherwise, I'll just send that PPT and people will not come and take it. They will not do whatever is discussed in the class itself. There are many things I am discussing which may not be there in the slides itself.